Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
I think we've learned our lesson with your daughter, Brad, wherein she is 10 times more talented than you. And anytime our schedule is dependent on whether or not she's going to be successful in her hockey game, like that kid's going pro. We know for a fact she's going pro, and the only question about it before was whether or not the PWHL existed. And I think Evan and I always give it the option of potentially she doesn't win her game and we can record earlier or whatever it might be because she's your daughter and you suck. But Mika's good, man. Like, carried her team to the finals.
Yep, and then had the game of her life in the finals. Just to lose in overtime. To an albeit much stronger team. The fact they A, made the finals was a minor miracle, and B, got to overtime in the finals, another minor miracle. But
anyhow, here we are on an evening episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. And usually when we have to do this, we're like, all three of us are grumpy to a different degree. But hey, Mika went to the finals. Sucks that she had her heartbreak, but good for her. Good for her for already surpassing her dad on relative talent here.
Maybe this will, we've set the expectation for happiness on her birthday now going forward really low. Next one's definitely going to be better than this.
Yeah, you got to win a championship on your birthday, kid.
Exactly, yeah.
And we always say every year on this podcast, Mika is kind of our benchmark for how long we've been doing this because we started this show before Mika was even a person in this world. Evan and I went to your wedding. People thought we were a couple.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of lore for you folks.
We weren't?
Well,
wow.
We got,
rude.
It was a 2-queen hotel.
You didn't have a plus one. I didn't have a plus one, so I just assumed.
This harks back to when we met Larkin at the fundraiser.
Yeah, that's right.
And we were trying to explain to him that we were both getting married, and we were both like, but not to each other.
Yeah. He laughed.
Yeah, thankfully he did. But yeah, Mika's been here for 8 years now.
Yep.
And the podcast has been going for over 9.
Yep. I feel so old all the time. I'm at that point where like something reminds me every day in just the most obnoxious way. And then, yeah, I get these twice a year where it's like, wait, you're telling me I have a person that's 8 years old?
Yeah, you have a whole person.
I have a whole person.
Anyhow, we've been doing this for 9+ years, and we're not stopping anytime soon. Welcome, folks, to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things hockey, the world of the NHL, the Detroit Red Wings, and lots more. I am one of your hosts who's not married to any of the other hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we're going to be talking to you about the Red Wings free agents, and I mean specifically their free agents, because we've talked a lot about, who Detroit might bring in, who is a trade target or a free agent from elsewhere, but we haven't talked a lot about their own players who are now going into either unrestricted or restricted free agency. We're going to be talking about the Grand Rapids Griffins, who are playing Game 5 as we speak right now in the AHL playoffs. We're going to be talking about a popular prospect for the Detroit Red Wings, potentially within range for them, although maybe not likely, in Catton. The World Championships, we're going to be revisiting some conversations from last episode in defensemen. NHL news in terms of the Stanley Cup Playoffs, movement of execs, and more before overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that this podcast is primarily supported by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show and join the so-called Dub Club, as Steve Dangle named it. You get access to some really great benefits like our Patreon exclusive Discord, which is a fantastic community. It's not just great for talking about the Red Wings or ripping on Brad or myself. It's also great for, there's golf channels or Formula One channels or Grand Rapids Griffins or other NHL games, whatever it might be. It's a really, really awesome place. You also get access to all of our Patreon exclusive bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones. Additionally, you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we gave away 2 tickets to every Red Wings home game for the past 2 seasons, the vast majority going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, it really does make a huge difference for us. Okay, the Red Wings and their free agents. They have a lot of varying types. If you ask other people, they might say Kane is the biggest name. If you ask some other folks, they might say Seider and Raymond are the biggest names. But Detroit has a lot of decisions to make. Some of them are within their control and some of them may not be. Who is the biggest name or the biggest names in your mind across all free agents and all types going into this offseason?
Well, Seider and Raymond, that's not up for debate. What happens with their contracts sets the table for the next potentially 3 to 8 years of Red Wings hockey and what their cap structure looks like when it matters. Obviously, the RFA status means there's no panic, urgency, not a whole lot of risk. They're not at risk of losing the players here, which is different from the UFAs. But even the Red Wings' best UFAs right now probably don't have an impact in the cup window. So, yeah, it still helps because while you're building up to the cup window, it's nice to get to the playoffs. But Raymond and Seider are the ones that really, really matter here.
For me, the urgency isn't so much about, penning the UFAs. It's getting the RFAs done in Seider and Raymond so that you can then determine what the picture looks like with your UFAs, because you don't want to do you can do your cheap UFAs first, but the key ones we'll talk about, like Gostisbehere, Kane, those are the ones you got to figure out, and you would like to get your RFAs at least, a framework mostly completed by the time you can offer something to them.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Like, obviously, you want to say it's obvious that it's Seider and Raymond, and it is, but those contracts can take a lot of different shapes. We like to simplify things by saying, yeah, they're both going to sign 8 years around the same number because that's just what's convenient for the team's cap hit, which as fans is what we care about more, and it makes it easier to digest. But, before the season, you might have said Raymond is more likely to bridge, and after the season, you might say Seider's more likely to bridge. These players have an incentive to bridge because they're really, really talented young players who are near-on superstars at highly coveted positions, and the cap is going up. So monetarily speaking, they have an incentive to bridge, and no doubt that's what their agents are pushing them to do. Yzerman is no doubt pushing them for 7 or 8 years. But it's really, really kind of up in the air in terms of what shape those contracts can take. So you don't know what kind of short-term cap space you have. Brad's right. Whatever these UFAs are, we're not saying we don't care about the next few seasons. Obviously, we do. We cared a lot about this last season. They weren't going to win the cup if they made the playoffs, but we still wanted them to do it. But these guys aren't going to factor into an eventual cup run in all likelihood. But what you can do in the short term is still going to be dictated by how much short-term cap space you have with Seider and Raymond. And overall, you've heard us repeat this a lot of times. It is best practice to sign good young players who you project are going to stay at least that good or get better for as long as possible. The cap usually goes up over time, and you get better value by signing them for longer. That said, with the cap going up in bigger leaps over the next couple of years, there is room to do shorter term contracts or bridge contracts to try to save some short term cap space, which Detroit needs because they have some players to try to deal away in terms of bad contracts or moves to try to make in case you can convince, a Patrick Kane type to stay. So yeah, Seider and Raymond, a long way of saying they are the most important, but they really are the most important, not just for their own contracts, but they're also going to allow you to decide what you can do this next year. Is it Kane? Is it Perron? Is it Gostisbehere? Is it a combination of any of them?
Yeah, to that point, and especially Evans, where you have to know what you have. And my fear, and the Red Wings have never done this. I've never seen Yzerman do this. So I'm not saying it's likely, but I've seen other franchises go out and throw a bunch of money around at UFAs, whether it's internal or external, whatever, and then figure out their key RFAs, because obviously there's no urgency with an RFA. But that's why bridge deals happen sometimes. It's like, all right, we spent all this money. This is what we have left. Guess we can only afford a bridge, because bridges are usually much cheaper on the AAV. And that's not ideal here. That's, again, you're right. We care about the playoffs very much in the next 2 years, but that doesn't mean it's the priority. And I know that word triggers a lot of people this season, but
whoops.
But it still has to be approached from the long-term view. And if you go out and you sign Seider to 9.2 and Raymond 8.6, and you extend Perron for 2.75, whatever, and then you're sitting there going, we only have $4 million left, can't afford Kane. That's the better alternative. Not saying I want to get rid of Kane. This is also under the assumption, the one thing we haven't mentioned, you can subtract.
Yeah.
There's buyouts, there's trades, there's ways to unload contracts. So if you signed Seider and Raymond to their big contracts, hopefully 7 or 8 years, and it eats up so much of the cap space, they don't have much left for UFAs, even though they could be near agreement on a deal with a UFA, that's when you buy out Justin Holl. That's when you trade Olli Maatta. Like all this stuff, there is flexibility here. And I'm not even saying you should want to trade Olli Maatta, but if you had to pick player A or player B, and all of a sudden Patrick Kane's sitting here going, yeah, I'll extend, but we don't have the cap space for it, sacrifices have to be made. That's how Vegas won a cup. Okay, we're going to make the hard decisions because that's what's best for the team. And I wish more teams would take that approach, but hopefully the Red Wings have at least the mindset of it. Now, again, we forgot to preface this all the time. We could throw out whatever hypothetical we want at Steve Yzerman. If the players aren't in line with it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But ideally.
Yeah, this is all predicated on what the players will agree to and sign to. Okay, before we jump into some contract projections and specific players, I want to discuss one more preemptive point, which is for most of the years of this podcast, the Red Wings have been a rebuilding team who haven't even been able to reasonably sniff the playoffs. The past 2 seasons, especially this past season, have shown some pretty serious progress in at least being a fringe playoff hopeful. And so I think in my mind that has moved them, and based on Yzerman's moves over the past few years, it's moved them into a space where you can now try to walk the line, and it's a thin line and it is a hard line to walk, but Yzerman's now in that lane where you try to walk the line of you bring up your young players, you still draft well, you're still drafting, in the middle spot of the draft, and you're trying to use young assets, but you can do something in the free agent space, you can do something in the trade space in terms of short to middle term deals to help you. Winning short term, even if it's not with a likely cup in mind, is still reasonable in terms of trying to make your team incrementally better, because by and large in the NHL, no one goes from zero to hero year over year. You need to slowly get better. Your team needs to slowly build to be a perennial playoff cup contender. I'm not going to say everyone thinks that, but that's just my opinion. Let's just jump into the biggest name right now. Unrestricted free agent Patrick Kane came in, was a revelation for the Red Wings in terms of his offensive production. Not a surprising player in terms of what he did, off the puck or defensively. I don't know how many board battles I saw him even engage in, let alone win. But with the puck on his stick, he is still, in my mind, a generational talent. You could see the respect and the space and the magic that he drew in. And no doubt the Red Wings want him back and the Red Wings players want him back. Patrick Kane has been pretty close to the chest, to put it generously, in terms of what he wants to do. Some might say it's unlikely. I just don't think we've seen it enough to know anything concretely, but what would it take to bring Patrick Kane back? And I'm going to cite very quickly, AFP Analytics and Daily Faceoff put out some projections, which we'll use as an arbitrary benchmark here. Patrick Kane's potential extension would be a projected $2 by $6.3 million.
If that was what he's actually going to sign, my guess would be it would already be done. Like, that's very reasonable for what he provides, even at his age.
I have to imagine it's not the money, it's the term. He's looking for at least 3 years.
I would agree. And we've even seen the rumors that's what he's looking for. In terms of Red Wings needs, like, this is the most obvious no-brainer. Probably can't afford to lose a point per game player. That's the reality of it going into the situation. Danielson could come up, be great. Kasper could come up, be great. Mazur could come up, be great. They won't replace him. They won't come close to replacing him this year. And, if the Red Wings are able to upgrade on blue line, if Edvinsson turns out to be the real deal, if they get someone half decent in free agency like we talked about before, great. Doesn't matter if you still can't score. And let's not, gloss past the fact that the team was pretty propped up by some shooting percentages last year that aren't likely sustainable. So you don't want to subtract from the group. Yeah, if you can, because there's already a likelihood for regression. Not severe regression, but regression nonetheless. If there's a way to keep Patrick Kane, you do it. If not, you better find someone who can. Otherwise, it could be a very long, boring year.
I'm on the same boat as you guys. Like, Patrick Kane, other than the RFAs, is priority number one because, like you said, he's a point per game player and he's Patrick Kane. You want to bring UFAs in. People want to play with Patrick Kane.
Yeah.
He's one of the best players of all time. And if you have to lose a Sprong, a Perron, you have to trade a bad contract, you do it, because then you're bringing up guys like Casper, and maybe you bring in Danielson, and who do they get to learn from? They get to learn from Patrick Kane, which has already proven to pay off with Lucas Raymond. So to me, it has to get done unless his asking price or term is just ludicrous.
What one name I haven't heard mentioned that probably is at least worth mentioning in the Patrick Kane mentorship role that could go a long way. I'm just saying, Jonatan Berggren plays a very similar style. If there's anybody for Berggren to learn from, it's literally him. You could not handpick anybody better in the league for Jonatan Berggren to learn from than Patrick Kane.
Berggren, if you're not going to be a physical player or take those board battles or, play the same game essentially as Patrick Kane, then if you can do even a little bit of what he does with the puck on his stick, then that's actually a really great point that I haven't thought about before. Patrick Kane turns 36 mid-November, so by all rights for next season, he's 36 years old. How much term are you willing to give him before you start to plug your nose?
At the AAV projected, 3 would be fine.
Would you go to 4?
No, I would not go to 4.
Hard no?
40 years old, man, I'm uncomfortable with 3. But I understand you. If you're not uncomfortable, the player is going to say no. So obviously you have to be in that range. And of course, the AAV matters. If Patrick Kane goes, I want 4 years, but I'll drop my AAV to 4. And no crap, you're going to do it, but that's not going to happen, right? So I think 3 years, you probably get 1 to 2 years of very good Patrick Kane still is my guess, because God knows how players age. And years 3 and 4 could be rough, but you're hoping year 3 would at least be manageable. But I think for like a 40-year-old, that's pushing it.
For a guy where we had zero expectations, came in, was a point per game player, I look forward to seeing what his rough years could be like, because it'll still exceed some of these guys that they have on the team right now in terms of production.
Wow, I can't believe he fell all the way off to a half a point per game and runs the second power play unit.
Yeah.
It's funny because when Kane was signing in Detroit, I had a little bit of information on what the contracts might look like. And up until the day he signed, myself and a few other people who are extremely in the know and are generally the ones reporting contracts, we were talking, and we thought it was going to be 3 years. Like, that's what was out there. So I don't know whether that was what Kane wanted or what the Red Wings wanted, because I couldn't pin down what the AAV was. But I mean, if you go back to when Kane signed, we said, like, this is a zero risk contract because Detroit's just signing him for the rest of the season. And that is what it is. Now, the risk there was that if he did extremely well and then they wanted to re-sign him, then per the rules of the CBA, he'll be a 35-plus contract, which makes it more difficult to, bury a contract, or if they retire or LTI, all that, all those nuances. But, I mean, who could have projected that it would go this well? In retrospect, hindsight's 2020, and you say, oh yeah, Patrick Kane's always been this kind of guy. But again, don't forget, this was an unprecedented medical procedure in terms of what he had done on his hips. We're happy for it. This isn't the worst case scenario. It's just it's a good problem to have for the Red Wings, maybe.
Well, it wasn't unprecedented. The precedent was everybody who came back from it was terrible.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
the result is unprecedented.
Yes.
The result is unprecedented. Yeah, no, it's the restrictions on the 35-plus contract that make you have to be super careful with how you structure it. Because, you're not buying him out for the normal rate, and you can't bury it in the minors. And if he retires, you're still screwed. So the restrictions, and I'm pretty sure there's a few other nuances that I'm just not remembering. But either way, you really, really have to be careful, especially considering we're hoping years 3 or 4 of this hypothetical contract, the Red Wings will be at least in contention to maybe win a playoff round or 2.
Yep. And in terms of people wondering what Patrick Kane wants to do, from our understanding, he liked it in Detroit. Not just based on what he said to the media, like what you're hearing behind the scenes. He did like it in Detroit. It worked for him here. He loved playing with the guys. When the team was doing well, it made a lot of sense for him. And there are some ties to his family and things like that. But this part isn't a secret. He is looking for a little bit more stability. And term is really what matters. Based on the conversations that he had with the media after, it's not surprising to assume that the negotiations maybe haven't been straightforward. Like, he's not getting the term he wants. Now, what I can't pin down is he looking for 3 years or is he looking for 5 years? Because those are big differences. I also see teams like Buffalo, obviously hometown, or Chicago, with Bedard and whoever they pick up in this next draft. They're going to have a lot of assets. They would welcome him back so gracefully. And if he's looking for a team that could win now, I mean, he wanted to go back to the Rangers, and then they essentially said no. They're potentially going to the Cup Finals, or they're at least in the Eastern Conference Finals. So it really depends on who tries to pick him up after. But Kane is going to have options, and it's not just Detroit's decision here. All right, let's jump into one where, we've talked about him like he is assumed to be gone because he priced himself out, and that's Shayne Gostisbehere and what he did for the Red Wings this year. Unbelievably talented offensive player. Defensively, as we talked about, at best average, most of the time below average, a lot of the time pretty well below average.
Well, we'll call him inconsistent.
Generously inconsistent. 56 points in 81 games, 10 goals, 46 assists, and how much of that came on the power play versus 5-on-5 is a different question, but no doubt what he can bring to your team offensively, and we all remember him climbing the ladder to almost saving the Red Wings playoff run in that giant leap. Did he price himself out of the Red Wings? This projection I have here is actually, I think, a little bit lower end than what I thought it would be, 3 times $5 million.
The Red Wings would be insane not to do that. I understand cap space, but again, you make the moves to make it happen. 56 points as a defenseman. I think people undersell how good that is. I don't care if it comes on the power play or even strength. You know what you're getting from him. If you're deploying him at 5-on-5 against the other team's top line, you screwed up. Full stop. But if he's going to go out there and play 12 even strength minutes, you hope that he can play against the bottom 6 on the other team and 50-50 a lot of those shifts. And then he goes out on the power play and turns a very mediocre power play into a threat. Yeah, that's worth $5 million in today's NHL.
The issue is, and this is where we jump into it. We talked about Seider, Raymond, we talked about Kane. Those are the guys essentially where we all agree if you can get them done, or with Seider and Raymond, obviously you have to, you do it, right? There's very few people who are on the other side of it. You get them done, depending on the price, you might not be able to afford Gostisbehere. You might not be able to afford Perron. Depending on who you can offload, or if you try to bring in someone else, you might not be able to sign guys at bigger numbers. Your second pair right D, or whoever's replacing Gostisbehere, might have to be a more efficient contract, or maybe you're flipping, Sherratt to that side and he's playing. It doesn't, there's a lot of different options, but it could not even be available for the Red Wings to bring him back.
Well, the question here is, and this is a good follow-up to our last episode where we went through a million D who can play on the right side and what they would roughly cost. Gostisbehere's contract is probably going to be very similar to a bunch of them. So it comes down to what's your priority. Do you think this power play can succeed without Kane and Gostisbehere, or without Gostisbehere, or without Kane, et cetera, et cetera? So if you're sitting here going, yeah, we need that bridge to Sandin Pellikka, and someone who can provide offense from the point is a priority, and the contract's anywhere around that, Gostisbehere is a no-brainer. But if you take the other mindset, yeah, we know we struggled to score, but we also struggled to defend, and that's the priority, and they prioritize a Chatfield, a Tyler Myers, a Chris Tanev, whoever the heck it is, then yeah, it's a no-brainer to let Gostisbehere walk. Because you need someone to fill that spot on the roster. And as we talked about with Montour last episode, there's not a lot of guys who are going to play that power play quarterback that you can afford, right? Like, Gostisbehere is going to cost, almost 40% less than what Montour might, or something in that range on AV and maybe term. So I don't know what side of the coin I fall on, because obviously the Red Wings sucked at both last year pretty dramatically. So, but whatever side of the argument you are on, do they fill that role with a defensive guy or an offensive guy is probably how you feel about whether or not you would bring him back.
I'd imagine if his price is very high, they're going to say, well, we'll divide his offense in half and split it between 2 guys. We'll put it between Edvinsson and whoever else we can get on the defensive market who could potentially play defense.
Gonna moneyball this shit.
They're going to have to moneyball it. Obviously, you would like to have Gostisbehere back. He was 4th or 5th on team scoring this year. But if you price yourself out of him because of Seider, Raymond, and I'll include Kane in that conversation, then it's going to be very difficult to bring him back if you cannot move anyone else out to free up the money.
And I was going to say, and it also, we talked about it a lot. You can't run it back this year, right? So guys are going to have to go. They need a spot for Edvinsson, Johansson, Berggren, Danielson, Kasper, whoever it might be. So obviously, to some degree, almost every free agent on this list, we're going to want to bring back. There's going to be a couple of them at least that aren't going to happen. It just won't.
Yep.
Because the fit's not there. That might be Gostisbehere. And if that is because they signed Raymond and Seider to longer-term extensions for more money, great. Yeah, obviously it would suck to lose Gostisbehere, and the power play would probably regress significantly without him, but it's still for the greater good.
You saying that hypothetical of what do you try to do, improve the defending, which was really, really shambolically bad at times, or try to preserve the scoring, because even if it's a little bit of a regression or an average regression, it still is likely to be a regression, especially if you lose Kane. My defense bias still goes to you need someone who can defend better. I also wonder, will Gostisbehere put up another 56 points? He's a really talented player. This wasn't new from Gostisbehere. You almost just wish they had him with some terms, so you might have been able to deal him even.
Yeah, and this is one of those conversations where you can't form a full opinion without knowing the other context. Am I comfortable losing Gostisbehere if we bring Kane back? Yes. Am I comfortable losing Gostisbehere and Kane? That's a lot of points, and I don't know where they're coming from.
Yeah.
With the Red Wings, again, we've talked about it. They're going to be hard-pressed in the trade market to bring in that top six scoring they need. They're going to be hard-pressed on the free agent market to bring in that scoring. Again, if you look at the D market for defensemen who can put up the level of offense that Shayne Gostisbehere can, that market's pretty much Brandon Montour, and there's no reality the Red Wings afford him. So,
the reality is a lot of other guys aren't a factor in the cap-friendly page anymore.
Yeah, honestly.
Which there's a reality where I might like that, but still.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the Red Wings mindset this offseason, now that we've talked about both of them, is one of them has to come back. I don't think they can afford both. I don't think that's likely. It would be great, but I'm not going to call it likely because you can only shed so much fat. Even if Yzerman's buying guys out, trading contracts, I don't think you're freeing up the 11, 12 million, whatever you're going to need for them. I don't see how that's feasible. But I think you need one.
My gut says neither.
I'm leaning that way based on how the winds are blowing. But that's going to be tough because, again, now that's over 100 points or close to it, just walking out the door. Again, I love Danielson. I love Kasper. I love Yzerman. And that offense ain't coming from them. Not this year anyway.
Perron. It's a tough one. The projection on him is 2 times $3 million. He's expressed interest in coming back. It's been reported by Emily Kaplan that the Red Wings have talked about bringing him back. There is no doubt that he is a leader in the room. There's no doubt that he plays the way you should play hockey, all capital letters, winning puck battles, scoring key goals. We saw everyone knows
6 game suspensions.
Yeah, 6 game suspensions. On that note, aside from that one kind of aberration of a situation, which was bizarre, some stupid penalties, but by and large, this guy is a heart and soul player for the Red Wings, and you can see why every team who he's ever played for has loved him. I see the Red Wings being interested in bringing him back. I would personally like to see Perron back. He is another player where I'm like, if you're not taking a discount, it's going to be very subject to what happens elsewhere, but I would guess that he comes back. So 2 by 3, what do you think?
I'm okay with it. I don't love it because we all know what David Perron is at this point in his career. He's a non-factor off the rush. He can't skate. He's got a bomb of a shot, and he might be the best player, definitely on the Red Wings, maybe in the league, along the boards with the puck in terms of protection, battles, making plays from that situation. But the regression already started this year. You could see he was not the player he was the year before. Man, if that's a trend, which at his age is the likely scenario, you got to be real careful with that second year, because if this year goes poorly, it could open up a huge can of worms for, again, future cap situations. Love the guy. I want to bring him back. I'm fully on board bringing him back. This is just one where you do have to be really, really picky with the contract.
Just like sign a discount per on, and then, when you retire, you get brought on as a player development director or whatever it might be, and don't worry about the salary because you'll be taken care of then. It's very not allowed, but it's also very much happens across the NHL.
100%. Hey, why did David Perron sign for league minimum? Weird. What do you mean he's the assistant general manager the day after he retires?
Yeah, I think I'm with you guys on this. Like, obviously would want him back. He brings a certain dynamic to his game that a lot of guys on the team don't have. Like, he's one of the first guys in every single scrum. And how many years have we talked about how the Red Wings just get rolled over by other teams? So you need someone like that, but I can't keep saying that I want every single player back because
it's not realistic.
It's not an infinite bankroll. So my initial reaction to 2 years by $3 million was, that seems like a lot. But he's almost, you know what you're going to get? You're going to get a guy who's around a 20-goal scorer, and I don't know if a guy like him will want to just take less than $3 million.
See, the thing is, I'm not sold he's going to be up in that goal scoring range anymore. Again, the regression started. Now, he had his moments this year, and he strung together a few streaks. Not the right word for it, but whatever. You know what I mean? Where he strung together a bunch of good games, but he also had some rough ones this year.
He took some time to get up to speed for sure.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful I'm wrong. And I think he's got a solid enough foundation that the regression will be slow, much like him. And he'll still be useful for 2 more years, albeit maybe
Hey,
not.
my friend Evan's slow, man.
Maybe not the 45, 50-point guy we hope he'll be, but still useful.
I think if the Red Wings if they can deploy him, like they can get his deployment in such a way where it's not so glaring, the regression, or it doesn't have as much of an impact. 2x3 doesn't scare me so much. I wouldn't want to go higher than that comfortably. It also, but again, the very obvious caveat here, it just depends on what happens with the other players that we've talked about.
Yeah, if you have to get rid of Perron because you signed Kane to an extra $500,000, yeah, okay, so be it. That's a better alternative. If you whiff on Gostisbehere and Kane, then you almost have to bring him back at that point, right?
Daniel Sprong, 3x4.
No.
Daniel Sprong is a hysterically efficient goal scorer with bottom 6 minutes, and there's a reason why he doesn't get anything more than bottom 6 minutes. The sidecar to this is that based on what we understand with how the end of the season went between him and the Red Wings, they don't see eye to eye. He wasn't understanding why he was benched compared to other players. The Red Wings were not understanding why he just didn't get why he was being benched. I don't want to say checked out, but how many times did we get some information about Sprong and we validated it and we said to each other, "Oh, he's gone.
Oh, he real gone." I still have a soft spot for Sprong. Again, he's a super efficient goal scorer on a team that can't score. And I know everybody's going to be yelling at me right now, like, "Oh, what are you talking about? They scored a ton this year." Again, look at shooting percentages, regressions. Like, I'm hoping the Red Wings are the outlier, but time and time again, it's proven never to happen. But there were some rough moments there, especially at that contract. Oh boy. Yeah, I just don't see it. And I think the money could be spent more effectively elsewhere at this point as well. The Red Wings have enough bottom 6 options. None that are going to score 20 goals. But maybe you get 10 to 15 out of a few guys, and it's not a steep drop, and then maybe they cause 5 to 10 fewer goals against.
Yeah.
Daniel Sprong is the living embodiment of draft this guy who's got one elite skill set but can't do anything else, and just hope like hell he puts it together a little bit. Because, man, can that guy score goals on playing no minutes. But, man, there isn't a whole lot else I like about his game.
Some Cup favorite team who has the ability to just bury him on, bottom line, maybe third line minutes, but just play him on the power play is going to absolutely love him, because that's the way you play Daniel Sprong. He is not going to be, as we hoped he might be, a middle 6 player or, in a different system or a different opportunity in Detroit, he's going to be able to, seize the moment. It didn't take long to see why he gets the minutes that he does. This one will be quick. Christian Fischer sometimes swears in interviews. Sorry, Mom, but easy to see why he's a fan favorite. If he comes, disagree or agree, if he comes in cheap, like, close to league min or not far above it contract, great guy to have on our fourth line.
Great fourth liner. Love him.
Yeah.
Pay him like a fourth liner. Fourth liners shouldn't get term, and the AAV can't be more than like 2 is really stretching it. He went, 40-something games without scoring at one point this season. So even though he's effective, he is the Venn diagram between a Christian Fischer and a Luke Glendening is a flat circle. Like,
hey, that's a great thing.
It's just understand what you're getting out of him and pay him accordingly.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind a couple of years for Christian Fischer, but not much more than that. And I think he likes it here, honestly.
Oh, yeah. No, he's one of those guys. He's easy to love. Everybody, including himself, probably understands his limitations. His agent probably understands his limitations. Contract negotiations will reflect that.
Yes or no, James Reimer?
God, no.
I'll say yes.
Okay, this one is an interesting one. Joe Veleno, RFA with arbitration rights. And he's progressed the way Joe Veleno progresses, but not like convincingly. What do you think it looks like for him? And is he a candidate to be moved?
Sure, he's a candidate to be moved. I think the Red Wings are at the point where almost everybody is. And the opinions I see on Joe Veleno are wild. He's basically younger, maybe a little bit more offense Christian Fischer. They both play a fast game. They're both aggressive. They're both pretty limited offensively. They do the things you want to do. Veleno's actually a pretty effective puck mover and transporter, which is not something you get from fourth liners a whole hell of a lot. His statistical profile is very weak, which means his ARB case probably isn't great. So I'd be in no rush to move him. I don't think he's going to cost you a whole hell of a lot.
No, I don't imagine that number is going to be very, very high. Okay, those are some of the Red Wings free agents, both unrestricted and restricted free agents. The conversations will progress, especially as we get closer to free agency and we get more information. We are going to transition now into one more player, and it's because the AHL playoff run has ended for the Grand Rapids Griffins. As we're recording right now, they fell 2-0 to Milwaukee in the decisive Game 5, which is unfortunate, and we'll talk about that. But rewind to Game 4, where the Griffins were down 2-0 going into the third period, and they had a 4-goal third period factored in by and really supported by a Jonatan Berggren 3-goal hat-trick performance in one period alone.
At the time.
At the time, because then one of the goals got changed, which is unfortunate because a couple of our listeners threw their Grand Rapids Griffins Winged Wheel podcast crossover hats, but not to worry, we're sending them replacements. So that is a worthy reason to get rid of your hat. But Berggren is an interesting one. He doesn't have a contract and he has arbitration rights. And, Steve Yzerman said the right things. Like, he's going to need to be on the team next year just because of his waiver status, and he's not clearing waivers. But there's also been rumors of what's Berggren's want to sign in Detroit? What are they offering him? Does he like what they're offering him? Because he's an NHL player on a lot of teams. You can argue he could be an NHL player on the Red Wings. Over the players they had at forward this year, jury's out at times. But he's an NHL quality player now. What happens with him? Does he get signed? Does he get moved? This one's a little bit up in the air.
Hey, I heard we might need to replace Daniel Sprong.
No kidding. I don't think he's scoring like Daniel Sprong, but no kidding.
I think the assist numbers might be a little higher. The goal totals probably will not be. Even though he had, 15 his rookie year? He can score. He's not a one-trick pony. But, yeah, if you want to replace Sprong, that third-line sheltered power play specialist, sounds like Jonatan Berggren to me. And we saw it firsthand when we were down there. I know he's a little scoring winger with not a lot of physicality to his game, but he's an asshole out there. I love it. He gets into stuff. He is not shy. He runs his mouth. He's in scrums. He's not what you would stereotype him as, looking at the profile, right? Now, is he going to go out there and lay someone out and, drop the gloves and have to fight? No, of course not. But I think there's a spot for him on the Red Wings, especially at this point in their rebuild, in his development, his age, everything. You got to find out what he is for sure at some point. Either you're selling high at, not selling high. You're selling at mediocre value. Because, again, he had a great season in the AHL, and the other organizations in the AHL are going to go, yeah, AHL. We're going to pay you as such if you would like to trade him. But, I don't know. I'd like to find out. If I had a choice, trade him and give that spot to a Danielson or Kasper, I'd probably lean that way. But since you're going to likely be selling low, yeah, let's see what he can do.
Like you said, he had 15 goals as a rookie, and they have not been able to evaluate where he would be after that. I think they have to do their due diligence and figure that out, because if he goes to another team and really pops off and solidifies himself in the middle six, I'll be very upset that they just let that disappear.
I don't have a lot of concern that he's going to go to another team and be this revelation in terms of something that we didn't know he would be. I do think that is a possibility that he goes to another team and is a middle six winger, though, just because of the fact that we've seen what he can do and the relationship with the team and how frustrated he is with what they want from him now versus what he wants to be doing, and that sends him elsewhere. People feel differently, though, when they have a check for a lot of dollars in front of them, though. So if the Red Wings evaluate what they can do over free agency and they say to Berggren, yep, we have a spot for you on the opening night roster as long as you earn it in camp. Here's your contract. It's a little bit more money than what you thought because we have a little bit more to spend than what we thought. All of a sudden, he's pretty okay with it. I agree with you, though, Brad, in terms of the loan system. There is a way to play him, and it's just by shelter. It's Daniel Spronging him, essentially, until he gets better, if he does.
Berggren's not 20, 21 years old anymore. He's in his mid-20s. We know what he is. We're just trying to figure out to what degree.
I will say, we know in general what he is, but I still think he has a lot of room to improve, though.
Yeah, no, 100%. But right now, if
he's not like a 21, he's 23 years old. He's going to turn 24 over the summer.
Yeah, like if let's say hypothetically he was in Detroit this year, put up 40 points. I don't think he's going to improve to the point where he's putting up 65 points. Like, I think we know what he is. He's at best a middle six winger who's going to have to play a sheltered defensive role and can probably contribute to at least a reasonable degree on the power play. Mm-hmm. This is his profile. He's not changing that at that point. And could you argue, is there much place in the NHL for guys like that on a cup team? Maybe, maybe not. I could see the argument both ways. Do I think he's going to go to another team and start putting up near point per game? No, of course not. His best case scenario is probably nowhere near that. So it's not like you trade him and it's like, oh my God, what a revelation he's become. Yeah, he could be a very useful, very good middle six winger. But understand, that's the ceiling. Like, you're not giving away Braden Point here.
All right. That's a lot on the Red Wings free agents. A lot was talked about now, and a lot will be talked about in upcoming episodes. But we are going to take a quick break and come back to you. But first, we want to let you know that this episode of the Winged Wheel podcast is proudly brought to you by Labatt Blue Light. Created in 1983, this premium light Canadian Pilsner is a delicately balanced beer brewed with Cascade hops and a blend of malt. It's fresh, crisp, and brewed to the highest quality standards. There's a little bit of Canadian kindness in every sip of Labatt Blue Light. How did it get in there? They're Canadian. That's how. You can spread the love yourself by sharing a Labatt. And when you do share a Labatt, you're not just sharing a beer. You're sharing an experience that'll pair with anything from hockey to a hoedown. So next time you're watching a hockey with your buds, be sure to share a Labatt, because while you might not all root for the same team, although we on this podcast do hope you're rooting for the Red Wings, you can all enjoy a Labatt Blue Light. We honestly love going to games in Detroit and seeing Labatt being the beer that fans clamor for all over the arena. It's a reliable beer and great to have in your hand when celebrating a goal. So head to the link in the description of this episode or the one you see on your screen to find Labatt in stores near you today. You must be 21 or older, and as always, enjoy responsibly. Welcome back. It is with great sorrow that we tell you that the Grand Rapids Griffins are done their playoff run. They again fell in a decisive Game 5 to Milwaukee. The Griffins had, what a year, what a turnaround they had, especially, in December and leading up after that. They really just didn't slow down, won a playoff round, and took this one all the way to a decisive Game 5. You can't say anything other than good things about what Dan Watson did with that team, how Sebastian Cossa really grew to be the starting goalie, what Simon Edvinsson was able to do down there. Obviously wasn't able to play in Game 5. We heard that it's a shoulder thing that he's nursing right now. But we'll talk about it more in future episodes, but just hats off to the Griffins.
Yeah, huge turnaround. They were one of the worst teams in the league last year. I know not literally, but still. And then they make it to the second round of the playoffs, game 5. Didn't Milwaukee have that miracle, 18-game winning streak or something like that?
They didn't lose forever.
Yeah, and I think Grand Rapids actually snapped that streak and then took them to the brink in the playoffs.
Yep.
Super impressive with a very young team.
Yeah. So they're not going to have all those players next season because some of them, or at least one, will graduate to the Red Wings, Edvinsson not included, and he will too. But still, they are going to be set up to perform well again next season. So again, congrats to the Griffins. Heartbreaking end to the season, but you can't say enough good things about them. The World Championships. Funny tournament. It always is with the World Championships. How much stock you want to put in it is up to you. Lucas Raymond in Sweden took home a bronze medal. Lucas Raymond also wanted to kill Dominik Kubalik on the ice, which was funny to see.
Always a good time watching angry little brother energy come out of Lucas Raymond.
He is a ferocious player, man. I love him. He's a dog out there. Czechia beat Switzerland in the finals. 4 nations competitors, Sweden and Canada, played in the bronze medal game. The other 4 nations participants didn't even make the semis in the States and Finland. So a funny look for that tournament. What was it that Pasternak said after scoring the winner?
He's not watching it.
Can you blame him if
No,
you're looking for a team that wasn't invited?
It's stupid. I said from day one, the idea of doing this tournament just as 4 teams is stupid. I understand logistics. I don't care. Switzerland is good. Czechia is good. There are other countries that are good. You could have easily made this an 8-team tournament. I'm full team pasta on this one.
Let's talk about something that's not stupid. Our 2024 NHL Draft Prospect Profile. Berkly Catton, very popular player in terms of who the Red Wings might want, but probably won't be there in terms of pick 15 in that middle of first-round range that Detroit's in. So who's Berkly Catton as a player? Is it realistic for Detroit? Would you move up for him? All of that.
He's the player that NHL GMs make mistakes on every year in the draft. Your Braden Points, your Logan Stankoven. The statistical profile is excellent. The game is very well-rounded. The height is not there. And there's this whole debate going around Twitter right now, which I'm not going to get into because everybody on every end of this one has been stupid. It's been infuriating. But just because you're small doesn't mean you can't play strong or you can't play big.
Core strength, bro.
Core strength. Core strength. It's all in the ass. Stupid. But either way.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Evan, who is chronically, and probably for his health, not online, looks so confused there.
I caught 10 seconds of this, and that was all I could handle, and Evan is all the better for not knowing.
Yeah.
This is why I stay offline in the offseason as much as possible. But I digress. When you see a small, very skilled forward, you assume they play wing. He does not. He is an effective center, an effective 200-foot center. Okay, is he a specialist playmaker? Oh, he's a very good playmaker. Well, he also scored over 50 goals as a draft-eligible 17-year-old. This is the type of stuff that is not normal. That is not common. You know, I remember, and obviously it's coming to the forefront in the playoffs right now as a rookie. This was all the same stuff I was saying about Stankoven in his draft year. Like, where's the flaw other than he's small? Same thing with Berkly Catton. Where is the flaw? What makes you think he could not be an effective NHLer? Dare I say, all-star level NHLer, if you just put the tape measure away. And I understand that if you're small and weak, you're going to struggle in the NHL. That's not him. So this guy is a no-doubter top 10 in this draft for me, and I'm seeing projections and mock drafts where he is outside of the top 10, and if that happens, the Red Wings need to be all over it.
If he doesn't go top 10, I'll be shocked because I agree with you. Watching his game, yeah, the size is a question, but his size isn't a question in such a way where you're like, oh, he plays small. He doesn't play small.
No,
there's small players who play with tenacity. They play like they're dogs out there. They play, you know, what you want to call it, a playoff style game or the right way. He plays 200 feet, and it doesn't come with a sacrifice to offense. It's very rarely where I look at a guy of his stature and say he's likely to stick at center. I watch him, and you watch as far back as you can. I think if this kid makes it, he's going to be a centerman.
Every year we have the conversation, this guy could be Braden Point, and it's never a good one-to-one comparison because there's so much nuance and difference. This is the closest to Braden Point we've had since Braden Point. Like the profile, the mentality, the skill. It's there. I'm not saying he is or is going to be Braden Point, but this is as close as we've been to the Braden Point quote unquote profile going into the draft.
I appreciate you saying that because we get the question every year and it's just such an impossible question to answer. But you, Brad Crisco, have now guaranteed that Berkly Catton is our Braden Point this season. So thank you for giving me a year's reprieve from not knowing how to answer who is this year's Braden Point.
I think for me, really, the only thing that you can really subtract other than the height is he also doesn't have a lot of weight to him either. Everything I could pull up, nobody had him over 170 pounds, which is not unreasonable for someone of his age. Like you see a lot of these kids who are like some of these Russian players who will be pure snipers and they weigh like 145 pounds going into the draft. It's like that kid has to get in the gym and just be a professional eater. I think Berkly Catton has something similar. Like if he wants to stick at the NHL level as a guy who's under 6 feet tall and plays center, he's going to have to be wider than he is tall.
Yeah. When I was 19, and if you would have said that to me,
I know you probably weighed 130 pounds.
I did, and if you told me you have to be a professional eater, I'd been like, I just don't have the appetite. But one day your switch flips, and you're like, man, all I want to do is eat.
Yeah,
I can't believe you didn't eat one of those chicken nuggets coming into my house today.
I'm all chickened out, but it was a tough go.
I wasn't 1,000% sure if that's what they were. I was eyeballing them very hard.
Did you wonder if they were dog treats?
Not dog treats, but I know you do a lot of cooking, and it's not like. It's good, but it's not all your usual stuff. So I'm like, I don't know for sure what's in that.
Right? You were scared of secret onion. You can just say it.
That's the biggest. That's always the biggest fear.
Some deep fried onion.
Oh God, a little blue. Is a bloomin' onion your worst nightmare?
It's close.
That's
to it.
The Crisco Trojan horse.
One day, I know one of my family members. I'm going to cut into a birthday cake, and it's going to be an onion.
Have you seen I think there's this girl who did Brussels sprouts, and she coated them like they were Ferrero Rocher. She gave them to her dad every year for Christmas. I'm going to start doing that to you, but with onions.
I was going to say, can you do it with Brussels sprouts? I love Brussels sprouts.
Brussels sprouts are good. Anyhow, Berkly Catton, I don't say this about a lot of players. As long as it's not dramatic, like if he's going 6th overall, Detroit's not moving up. That's a dramatic move up. It's very unlikely, I should say. Not impossible. If he's within range of a few picks, 4 picks, I'm moving up for Berkly Catton. I like the player a lot.
The biggest hurdle to that is if you're I forget who's sitting at 11, 12, 13. If you're sitting there and Berkly Catton falls in your lap, you're probably not trading out of that pick.
Yeah.
Unless you're one of the super defense needy teams.
Okay, that's Berkly Catton. We're going to be talking about him a lot, hopefully. Before we get into some NHL news, Evan, you have a victory lap to take.
Oh, I didn't know that my army was so numerous online. I mean, how could I? I would have to go on the internet.
Evan was right, man.
Yeah, my army came out of retirement. They donned their armor, our house crest.
It's been a long time since it was proven to Brad and I that Evan is by far the most popular host on this podcast.
It's been a while since it's been proven. The knowledge never wavered.
The truth has always been the truth.
We always knew.
I basically was saying that Brandon Montour is a really good player, and it was like not even a hot take. Like it was a bad take, really.
No, it wasn't.
I'm like,
no,
we should go after
what happened after.
We should go for a guy who's really good. That's what I basically said.
Sound the alarms. Honestly, you know what? I'm the one who threw you under the bus here, Brad, because you were just like in the moment. You were like, yeah, but is he that much better defensively than Gostisbehere? And I said out loud, I'm like, I think he is. And I went to go look up the defensive numbers because I'm like, I'm pretty certain he is. Evan was pretty certain he is. But we just wanted to move on to the next segment. And then it wasn't until after the episode we got in the group chat, we were like, oh man, he is so much better defensively.
I'm sure he's better than Gostisbehere defensively. I'm not refuting that. But where I screwed up in my argument was I did not properly convey my ultimate point, which was I understand Montour's better, but you're going to be paying him almost double the money. And with the Red Wings cap situation, they can't afford full Brandon Montour. They need wish.com Brandon Montour.
I'll take a full Brandon Montour. Like,
oh yeah, 100%. Who wouldn't want Brandon Montour? But you can't afford him.
Sometimes we get things wrong on the Winged Wheel podcast, and it's always funny when it is a double whammy of Evan gets to take a victory lap, and then we also get to go back to, you also did follow that up with a Tony DeAngelo take, so It's the duality of man right there.
Just throwing it out there. Got to keep the thought experiments going.
I'm safe on this one.
Just
between Brad on Montour and you on Tony D'Angelo, like you guys are the ones who have to eat it. I for once didn't shove my foot in my mouth.
One day you will fall off that comfortable fence of yours.
Brad, tomorrow, probably. What do you mean one day? Before our playoff update, moving on here, did you guys see that trade, that draft floor style trade between Chicago and the Islanders?
I don't understand it at all. Not even a little bit.
I have some theories. So,
like, it's an understandable trade on the draft floor.
Yes. Very quickly, the Blackhawks got 18th overall and 50th overall in this draft in exchange for 20th overall to the Islanders, 54th overall, and then 61st overall. So essentially the Islanders moved back 2 picks on their first round pick, 4 picks on their second round pick, and got an extra second round pick in exchange. So Chicago really wanted to move up to 18, and then I guess moved up 4 spots in the second round to make it justifiable to give up the extra second round pick. The way I see this is Chicago has some guys that they really want in and around 18. That's where their lists drop off. And the way I see it for the Islanders is one of 2 things. You're stocking up for a trade, or your cupboards are bare and you're just trying to load up on as many prospects as possible now.
It's that one. It's their prospect system sucks. So it's a smart trade for the Islanders. Like, it's an overpay to move up to 18 and 50, like relatively speaking, to give up an extra second to do that. But that's one of those deals where you're on the floor and a guy you have 11 on your list falls to 18. You're like, we got to go get him. Pay whatever it takes. Like, go get your guy. Fully understandable. It's May.
It's so weird.
Like, how do you know how the board's going to... They have 18 guys on their entire draft board, and like, we're getting one of them.
I was I was working on something really difficult at work, and I was just kind of giving myself a brain break, and I saw that notification come through, and I just kind of rubbed my temples and was like, am I crazy, or is this really weird?
Super weird. Totally normal trade in the NHL draft when pick 17 is made.
So funny.
Could have used the sphere to make this play happen, but they decided to do it early. That's wasted opportunity.
All right, the Stanley Cup Playoffs, Dallas and Edmonton are tied 1-1. Connor McDavid almost ended the game in overtime in Game 1 in a few different ways. First, by taking a double minor high sticking penalty, which he argued like it was the end of times, but it was absolutely a high stick, as Vancouver fans were punching through their TVs to say, and then got robbed by a combination of Tanev and Ottinger. Tanev, who added another probably $500,000 to his next contract, and then ended it actually in the second overtime. Dallas won Game 2, but Edmonton gets a split coming back home.
This series rocks.
It does.
It has been so entertaining. Like, it's so important to watch the playoffs, to get out of the Red Wings sphere, to remember what good hockey looks like. Like, good, entertaining, fun hockey.
Mm-hmm.
Like, trading chances, physical, like you mentioned with McDavid, weird stuff happening all over, no shortage of drama. God knows what you're getting out of the goaltending. Love it. Great series.
And then the Rangers earlier today winning in overtime to take Game 3. They are up 2-1 over the Florida Panthers. They now have the advantage in this series. That is also an extremely, extremely fun one. Florida took it 3-0 to the Rangers in Game 1, but the Rangers came back with a 2-1 overtime win and now another overtime win. This series has the makings of one that's going to be really tight.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. And every year in the playoffs, there's a bunch of series where a team gets outplayed but still wins because goaltending, luck, clutch overtime moments. Hasn't happened these playoffs. The presumptive favorites have won every series. Maybe this is the one, because I'd say, by and large, Florida should be winning the series at least 2-1, if not 3-0. And here we are with a 2-1 Rangers lead.
But, hey, there's a lot of conversations about should Carolina have been up 2-1 or at least down 2-1 instead of 3-0 down. It's the other side of the coin for the Panthers. That's what I love about the playoffs. Overtime is overtime. I don't care what the deserve to win-o-meter says.
Yeah,
overtime is overtime.
That's when superstars step up to score the big goals, like Barclay Goodrow
and Alex Wenberg.
Barclay Goodrow is one of those guys I'm surprised when he gets tossed in the ice in overtime. And He's got that one in the conference finals, and he's got a Game 7 overtime winner from when he was in San Jose.
Hell yeah, man. Dude's rock.
Oh, man, it's crazy. And Jiminy Crickets, what a story that is. God, I love Matt Rempe. How do you not like this guy?
He is... You look at him, you're like, you get punched in the head way too much, dude. Like, it's going to be a problem. But also, you're a lot of fun.
He's that old school, I can't do much out here, so I'm what's he, like 6'7", 6'8"? He's like, I'm going to go out here, truck dudes. I'm going to fight dudes. He's got such a baby face. He does it with a smile on his face. Like, I understand the sideshow of it all can be a bit much, and it's a lot relative to what it actually is and who he actually is. But, man, if you hate the Matt Rempe story, you hate fun.
Evan has rocks for brains, and he's a lot on this podcast. Why can't we enjoy Matt Rempe? You there, buddy?
Yep.
Were you surprised when I said your name? You looked shocked there for a second.
I don't know why I'm involved in this conversation.
We're talking about violence. Evan, this is exactly your conversation.
All right. Very quickly, one last piece of NHL news. Don Waddell is out as GM of the Carolina Hurricanes. Kind of an interesting one. He was interviewing elsewhere as his contract's expiring, but you don't typically hear of that happening, especially with execs in the NHL. But Carolina's different. The way Tom Dundon runs that team is basically... Waddell had interviewed elsewhere before at the end of a contract, and they let him do so before they ultimately re-signed him. But this time, they let him walk. It sounds like Waddell was also... He was pretty done in Carolina. I don't know the veracity of this, but this isn't a Hurricanes podcast, so I'll just say it. I heard some frustration about the Brind'Amour negotiations, and maybe what Waddell had originally negotiated was then nixed by ownership or higher up, which would align with the way Dundon kind of runs things. So, and we saw that back and forth with the Brind'Amour negotiation. Like, we thought he was going to be signed, and all of a sudden he wasn't. And if that was Waddell had negotiated an extension and then Dundon, the owner, said no, wouldn't be surprised. Now, someone who was on the show Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashanth Iyer and Sean Shapiro within the Winged Wheel Podcast Network, Eric Tulsky, assistant GM of the Carolina Hurricanes, and now the interim GM, and they are doing a GM search, and I will be shocked if it's not Tulsky as a GM. He is probably near the top of most people's lists of who's next to be a GM in this league.
Yeah, and he was reportedly in a lot of the decisions, if not all of the decisions in Carolina. They trusted his voice a lot. And it makes sense. And this all makes sense because, the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. And, man, these reports about Waddell and Dundon have been going around for years. Like you said, he was interviewing with other teams years ago.
Yeah.
Before ultimately a reunion. Like, nobody's shocked by this. It was just a matter of time.
Reports that he interviewed in Columbus, and they may be looking at him for either a high-level hockey exec job, if they are looking for, a future president of hockey ops, current GM, or maybe something on the business side, but wouldn't be surprised if they land him. So not officially announced right now, but expected. And honestly, I don't really know what to make of it. Waddell's it's really hard to evaluate him knowing how much control the ownership group had in Carolina. But it's a good team now. Hard to get worse if you're Columbus, so is what it is.
He's got a blank canvas.
Yeah, and not a bad pool of prospects to work with.
A very good pool of prospects.
Okay, let's jump into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. If you want to support the show and join the Dub Club, the Discord, the giveaways, the bonus overtime episodes, and you allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation. You allow us to host Winged Wheel Podcast nights in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings and the Grand Rapids Griffins. You also allow us to produce not just this show, but also other great content like Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashanth Iyer and Sean Shapiro, who have now interviewed 2 GM or higher level execs in the NHL. We are getting lapped by Prashanth and Sean, but we are very happy for it. It's a great show. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Questions from our patrons. Known Petrie Truther, the Mex-Canadian, says, just a thought, but I really want to see a Mazur Kasper Rasmussen line just to see how big of a pain it would be.
Could they score goals? Is my question.
Maybe.
Eventually.
Yep. As a fourth line, like depending on who you have there.
If we have a 9th overall pick on the 2 9th overall picks on the 4th line, Ryan, I'm going to be upset.
That's not good.
It'd be funny for Evan and I. At least his start is fine. Flungpoo Kamahu says, with Mrazek's recent comments that Carolina doesn't know how to correctly utilize Natchez, do we have confidence that the loan system would allow Natchez to play to his strengths if they acquired him? Or do we even care and we just figure it out later?
I don't have confidence in that because I don't know, but I'm willing to find out.
That's how I feel. Would I say confident? No. But this is a changing team, and what they were last year doesn't mean that's what they have to be the next year. Give Wallman the Heart says, what do you think is more likely, seeing the Mazer, Casper, Berggren line in Detroit next season, or none of them being on the roster?
The more likely scenario is none of them being on the roster. When was the last time an NHL team threw out 3 rookies?
You're not technically incorrect, but I don't think it's so far off. Even if just for like a one game, you know?
Yeah, maybe a game, and then they're a -3, and we never see it again in the NHL for 3 decades.
The NHL's no fun, man.
I know.
Just throw them out.
I know.
Okay, just for the sake of time, let's take one more question here. Samuel Soderholm says, if you could pick any player not named McDavid, Matthews, Draisaitl, or Bedard, who would it be and why to have him on the Red Wings?
Kucherov.
I'm taking Makar over Kucherov.
I was leading Makar. Age, position, level of eliteness.
Didn't have 140 points, but that's okay.
Got pretty damn close for a defenseman.
What goalie do you take?
If I could handpick any goalie in the NHL?
Yeah, James Reimer probably.
Yeah, he's up there. Have to consider him. Because the obvious answers are probably a little older than most people would expect. Like, if you think Shesterkin, Sorokin, like, they're not super close to 30, but they're not terribly far away either.
That's just the name of the, like, that's what goalies are.
Yeah, and there's not a ton of sub-25 goalies who have established themselves, because that's kind of what I'm trying to look for in my head. Honestly, the first name jumping to my mind is Ottinger, because I don't think he's that old.
That's not a bad one.
So you maybe get an extra 2, 3, 4, 5 years out of him compared to similar goalies, right?
How old's Jeremy Swayman?
Oh, that's a good answer.
Swayman's a really good answer.
Is he
That's
old?
a really good
I don't
answer.
He's
think
the same. He's
old,
the
right?
same age as Ottinger, but they're both 25. They turn 26
Okay.
towards the end of the year, so that's not a bad answer at all. Okay, last one here from Jonathan Melwish says, hello all. In the UK, we have an event called the Magic Weekend for a sport called Rugby League. Basically, all the teams come together for a weekend and a series of matches are played at the same location. Could this happen in the NHL with it being split between the Western and Eastern conferences at different times of the seasons? Logically, it could be done over 3 days based on a game split of 2-3-3.
I'm pretty sure you just described a tournament.
Like an in-season tournament of sorts.
And I am so sick of tournaments. Has nothing to do with the NHL.
How bad would that ice be on day 3?
Yeah.
Well, it depends.
The NHL would want to do something outdoors too, like.
And something with a gambling ad. Minimum.
Yeah, the in-season tournaments, I think, are going to slowly make it to all professional sports leagues, but
We never really did relitigate this because I know, and we're not going to do it now, but maybe topic for a future episode, because we had last offseason the conversation about an in-season tournament, and I think we all came to the conclusion of we're intrigued, but we want to see what it looks like in the NBA. Without getting into detail, I don't like it.
they had fun with it, though.
They had fun with it, but like it really did truly end up feeling like nothing.
In the end, yeah, like no one's thinking about it right now.
No.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. We really, really appreciate you listening. If you're a new listener, welcome to the show. And if you're a listener of old, thank you for tuning in for all this time. To Labatt Blue Light, thank you for sponsoring this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. And to all of our Patreon supporters, we could not do it without you. Again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to take the extra step and go the extra mile to support the show. And if Patreon's not for you, but you still want to support the show, other ways you can do it. Leave us a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Leaving us that rating is a big help. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Give a thumbs up on YouTube or whatever it is. Leave a comment and tell a friend about the show. It really does help. To all of our name level supporters on Patreon, we can't thank you enough. Arjun Shanker, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Victor Zetterberg, Ryan, Brad, I'm Swallowing Hannah, Glenn Brabham, Croner's Left Knee, Ashley Van Conant, Sea Lion, Keenan O'Donohue, Yanni Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Avery Sloppy Seconds, Beep, Carl Britannia-Naluski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Naney, Connor Scovey, Craig Kibble, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Seider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose, Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Sam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Joel Miranda, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Marcus, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul, Pud, S. Klein, That's What I Appreciate About You, Scott Martin, Skeletor, Screen Lube, Stoli 70 Wingnut, Utah Stormin' Mormons, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Yzerman Stan, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, AB, Adam Rose, All Motor, No Hands, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Brad Simmons, Chi-Town Wings Fan, Chimkim Nuggets, Chuck Buffchest, the Tarp Lagoon, Commander Ben Barron of the Cheesebag Space Force, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes, Dirty Deke, Eric Nance, Evans Fourth Putt, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Griffey Boy, I, Donald Duckett, Business Up Top, Party Down South, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Ingles, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Known Petrie Truther, the Mexicanian, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Michigan Boy in Avs Country, Ophelia, Red Wing Tar Heel, Salt Lake Sugar Girly, Sean Mason, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123. This episode is sponsored by Twisters, Tom Yzerman Respecter, Throw the Road Puss, Wings fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you midweek.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.